Pokemon right here.
Oh! They banned my party! Pokemon Go has an interesting cheating dilemma. Unlike most other games out there, a vast majority of the Pokemon Go player base openly break the terms of service while playing the game. Now when I say break the terms of service, that could include GPS spoofing, multi-accounting, using unauthorized third-party apps and devices, using maps and scanners to find rare Pokemon or to coordinate raids, driving while playing, etc. All of these are bannable offenses, yet plenty of players utilize them freely every single day. Basically speaking, Pokemon Go has a ton of cheaters, and they have pretty much become a part of the game. To simply remove all cheaters from Pokemon Go would vastly change the game itself, but what would Pokemon Go look like if there was zero cheating? What's going on, everyone? It's me, it's Count, here with an all new Pokemon Go video, and yes, it's been a while since I've made a video essay like this one. And the reason for that is because I was looking for a topic that I knew would spark discussion, that I knew would be very controversial, and this topic is certainly that. So definitely sound off in the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts regarding everything that I'm going to be talking about in this video. I would love to know what the community thinks and what the community would want. And yes, I do have to emphasize that I do not condone nor do I condemn spoofing, multi-accounting, or any other forms of breaking the TOS. That's entirely up to you as a player. Just know the risks that anything you do that is against Niantic's terms of service could result in your account getting banned, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So yeah, if you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Because of how broad the game's terms of service actually is, there is admittingly a huge gray area for what constitutes as cheating in Pokemon Go. For the sake of this video, we will be primarily focusing on the three largest offenses that are lock and key: spoofing, multi-accounting, and using scanners. We will explore what Pokemon Go would look like if no one ever did any of these. Interestingly enough, it's not the utopia that legit players would have you believe. If Niantic were to take every single player who ever broke the terms of service and ban them, the player base would look extremely bleak. The reality is, almost every player of Pokemon Go has broken the terms of service in some way, shape, or form since they started the game, whether they were aware of it or not. Have you ever driven while playing the game? You broke the terms of service. Have you ever used a gacha or an IV checking app? You likely broke the terms of service. Have you ever raided or traded with someone who broke the terms of service? Then chances are you also broke the terms of service simply by interacting with them. Now yes, I can agree with anyone who will say any of these actions are a gray area. However, the language of the terms of service is broad enough where Niantic could very easily include any of these as means to ban your account. Niantic has also stated publicly through social media and through support emails that certain actions, which a vast majority of players would argue don't break the terms of service, are actually definitively breaking the terms of service and could get your account banned. This could include using IV apps like Calci IV and PokeGenie, as well as using a gacha. And yes, I get it, Niantic has frequently contradicted themselves in the past between social media posts and support emails, so I get that these sort of statements can't always be trusted. However, we can't just ignore the fact that these statements were made from Niantic themselves, which means we still can't consider these actions 100% safe. If we look at it broadly, pretty much everyone has broken the terms of service in some way. Simply eliminating everyone who has ever broken the terms of service would be eliminating, well, everyone. But not a lot of players spoof, multi-account, or use scanners. These are what I would call the terrible three of breaking the Pokemon Go terms of service. These actions would give you the biggest advantage that an average player would generally not have. So what would happen if everyone who does these three things stop? Let's first take a look at one of the terrible three, and that's scanners. This is a very interesting one indeed, because scanners are somewhat making a comeback. It's not as widespread as it was in the past, but some communities out there, especially the big ones, are bringing scanners back into the fold thanks to some third-party development. Now, the very first noticeable change that players would see if scanners would be removed would come in the form of raids. Getting raid groups and coordinating raids would look vastly different in almost every type of community, especially the rural ones. Coordinating raids in rural areas is extremely difficult without the help of a scanner. Sure, some communities do pull it off, but by my experiences raiding with some of the rural communities out here in Illinois, it's extremely difficult to find raids near you without looking them up on a map. I'm not saying this is something I've done personally, but it's definitely a tool that most people I raid with utilize. Now, another more obvious change that players would see without scanners is that certain rare Pokemon would still be rare. One argument that I've seen for scanners is that certain Pokemon which were inaccessible before are now accessible. Since the game is very heavily luck-based when it comes to spawns, having a scanner or a map allows some players to be able to obtain certain Pokemon that they generally would not have found before, such as unknowns and perfect IV Pokemon. If we didn't have scanners, these sort of Pokemon would not be as widely obtained, and having any of these Pokemon would give players a bit more prestige. Of course, for a vast amount of time now, we didn't have scanners to bolster our gameplay, so even though we would see a noticeable change, it's not a detrimental one. We've all already experienced what it was like to play Pokemon GO without scanners, and it never was a problem. In fact, some players would argue that the game is way better off without scanners, and that is because rare Pokemon would retain their rarity, and raids would require that much more coordination and community engagement. Simply speaking, eliminating scanners wouldn't be detrimental to the game at all, but in fact might improve the game quite a lot. But scanners are probably the least controversial compared to the other two offenses amongst the terrible three. Now let's get into something more infamous, and that is multi-accounting. Now I've said this in previous videos, but multi-accounting has been a mainstay in Pokemon GO for a very long time, but its infamy didn't truly develop until recently with the whole Pokemon GO Fest ticket drawing system. This was the first instance that multi-accounting truly directly affected players in a negative way. Now, it wasn't apparent to me how many players actually multi-account until I started looking into it. As it turns out, a very large number of players play with at least one alt account, whether on multiple devices or within the same device. In fact, it's so widespread that every raid that I do nowadays has half the lobby that will be alt accounts. And this is actually where I think removing alt accounts would have the largest impact. Raids. If you took a really close look at the raiding scene in Pokemon GO, what you would find is that a majority of players who play in rural areas tend to struggle to get enough players together for legendary raids, while in urban areas, getting players together for raids is not such a struggle. There is one common denominator here. In both areas, multi-accounting is very common. When it comes to raids, having multiple accounts from one user could be the difference between defeating a raid and not defeating a raid. Legendary raid battles are almost always a numbers game, where it's not so much about type advantage and metas, but how many people you can throw against the boss. Having multiple accounts vastly improves your odds at defeating a raid boss. Now, instead of having 3 to 5 people in a lobby, which of course means your chances of defeating that boss will all depend on what Pokemon each player brings to the battle, you could potentially have 7 or 9 people in that lobby, which would solidify the victory regardless of what Pokemon you bring. Take away multi-accounting, and raiding would become an entirely new thing, a challenge. In my opinion, Niantic never created raids with multi-accounters in mind. If you think about raiding nowadays, you really don't expect any kind of challenge from a gameplay point of view. Multi-accounting could take away much of that strategy that was intended for raid battles. Take away those multiple accounts, and suddenly you wouldn't have the surefire victories that you would see now. If you can only muster together 5 people for a legendary raid, you will be required to strategize, coordinate, and plan much harder than you would nowadays, where it's almost guaranteed at least one of those 5 people will have 2 or more accounts. Raiding would be much closer to what it was meant to be, and legendaries would be significantly more rare. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to every community. People who play in urban areas, for example, will typically have no problem getting full lobbies with or without alts. But removing multiple accounts could vastly destroy the raiding scene where getting a full lobby is next to impossible. And of course, I'm talking about rural communities. Here in Northwest Illinois, we have a very big mix of different communities. We have our large downtown Chicago communities where getting a raid together is a simple line chat away. And we also have our rural communities where coordinating for a legendary raid is almost like pulling teeth. For the sake of this video, I reached out to several players who play in rural areas, and this is what one of them had to say. Getting legendary raids done in my area is next to impossible without the help of alts. At most, we could probably get up to 6 people, and most of them will be under level 30. The only way we could typically defeat these legendaries is if we have several people use alts or share accounts with others. Even though these people are breaking the terms of service, they just simply cannot enjoy the game without resorting to doing it. As this person mentioned, it's next to impossible to find enough people to defeat a legendary raid boss without the help of multi-accounters. Now, this may not necessarily be true for all rural communities, but it is quite common among them. If Niantic were to remove multi-accounting completely, it would devastate the rural communities the most. Raiding would be a pipe dream. Hardly anyone would even have a small chance at being able to complete a legendary raid. Now, speaking of rural players, this leads me to my last and probably the most egregious offenses among the terrible three: GPS spoofing. Yes, this is where the video essay gets juicy. Probably the most divisive and most controversial form of cheating to date is without a doubt GPS spoofing. As I mentioned before, offenses like using scanners and multi-accounting tend to go ignored by the legit players, but spoofing? Oh no, spoofing hardly ever goes unnoticed. So what would the game look like if there was zero spoofing? Interestingly enough, this is one area where I think the game could vastly improve for pretty much everyone if it were to go away. Now, I know I'm going to draw a lot of hate here, but bear with me for a second. Spoofing is often justified by the fact that the rural gameplay is lacking, which is true. However, a vast majority of spoofers do not actually live in rural areas. Based on the people I've talked to, and from what I've seen on the Pokémon GO spoofing subreddit, the population of spoofers very closely reflects the population of non-spoofers. So yes, there certainly would be a dip in player count, but this dip would hardly affect legit players since a vast majority, and I mean a vast majority, do not rely on spoofers as they would multi-accounters and scanners anyway. In fact, most non-spoofers would say they avoid playing with spoofers outright. So what benefits do spoofers actually bring to legit players? Nothing. Now I know what you are thinking. Just like multi-accounting, spoofers help rural players raid. Spoofers fill up lobbies that would have not filled up beforehand, and for some communities, yes, that might be true. But spoofers will never actually raid in rural areas, let's be honest here. Where spoofers would be raiding are areas where raids typically have no problem getting filled up anyway, and here is a major negative. Most times that I raid, it is typically in a wafu or a raid train format. We get a group of people together and do multiple raids in a given neighborhood within a short window of time. If for any reason we have to re-lobby because someone couldn't get in, or we have to spend the extra time coordinating private lobbies, then that could lead to us missing several raids at the tail end of our train. This is where I've seen spoofers seriously hurt my experience. When spoofers fill up lobbies, my group typically will end up with 1 or 2 people who couldn't get in because the lobby is full. This ends up slowing down the raid trains significantly. The extra time taken to re-lobby or to set up a private group usually results in a few missed raids. This is especially something that can damper wafu raiding. If spoofing was to be completely removed from the game, you would see Pokémon GO as it was always intended to be. A game where you go outdoors to catch them all, and a game that involves players coming together and meeting each other to accomplish a common goal. You get glimpses of that nowadays, yes, but with spoofers constantly muddying the waters, sometimes that experience is not fully achieved. For example, having regional Pokemon would have retained its own level of prestige if spoofers were not in the mix. One of the big issues I had with trading once it was released is the fact that spoofers who had dozens of regionals spread them out to everyone. Through my travels, I took a great joy in having Pokemon that others did not have. And yes, I totally get that not everyone can travel, but this is where trading could have shined the most. But since spoofers like to distribute extremely rare regionals without problem, having that prestige of being the only guy with Corsolas is now lost, and the trade value of said Pokemon is lost as well. Now, of course, there is a simple solution to this, and that is to have legit players never interact with spoofers, which most don't. But then now that leaves us with how spoofers directly affect the gameplay for non-spoofers in a very negative way, and that is gym battles. If it wasn't for the fact that gym battles are designed the way they are, and that they are the only source of free-to-play Pokecoins, I truly believe nobody would care about spoofers existing. For most spoofers I talk to, this is the one area that they claim they do not do. Now, whether or not that is true, gym sniping from spoofers is still a major problem in Pokémon GO. For the sake of world rankings, local prestige, Pokecoins, and getting additional items from spinning, building up gym badges are vitally important to some players. Assigning 20 gym defenders takes an excruciating amount of time and effort. The very fact that someone sitting on their toilet could exert the lowest amount of effort for the same results, while also effectively negating the effort of that legit player walking from gym to gym because the spoofer is just knocking out the Pokemon behind them, that leaves a major sting. Trust me, we've all been there. Despite what any spoofer or spoofing community will say, gym battling is the one major reason why non-spoofers will vastly despise spoofers. Even if every spoofer were to collectively say they would never gym snipe, there would still be that one or two who didn't get the memo or effectively refused to cooperate, who would ruin it for the rest of them. This is why people do not like spoofers, and this is why spoofing needs to go. If spoofing were to not exist, gym battling would be a much more positive experience. Sure, other legit players can definitely knock out your Pokemon just as easily as spoofers could, but the playing field would be a lot more level. Legit players would not necessarily be as frustrated with gym battling as they would be now. And like I said, if spoofers were to stop gym sniping altogether and if they were to gym battle like everyone else, then yes, maybe spoofing should be ignored and it's not necessarily a big issue. But because it is something that negatively affects players, this is something that I really think would benefit the game completely if it were to be removed. So in conclusion, yes, removing all cheaters would vastly change the game. In some ways, it could be negative and would require a major adjustment from players. However, in other ways, it could vastly improve the game and bring it closer to its intended original design. Now, I've said this countless times, but it bears repeating. If Niantic wants to see less cheating in Pokemon GO, then they have the responsibility to make the right design choices that would encourage a player not to cheat. And for the most part, they've already begun that work. Adding more Pokestops and gyms to rural areas would certainly discourage spoofing and multi-accounting. Having an official raid map that's similar to Ingress's Portal Recon map would effectively eliminate most players' desires for scanners. It's really up to them for cheating to end. So there you have it, that's going to be the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Of course, this is a hot topic issue. I would love to know your thoughts and your opinions, and let's have a great discussion going because, of course, there's going to be a lot of opinions on both sides. I would love to know all of them. Definitely share them below. And if you ended up enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. It would help out the channel a great deal. And subscribe if it's your first time here for more video essays just like this one. I am Count Jinsula, and I'll catch you all later.